interwebs, I hope you're all doing well. So I have put on my snazzy Star Trek Lower Decks knit uniform. Like, yes, I found this and I adore it so much. Sadly, they are sold out of it. Otherwise, I tell you all where I got it. But it's freaking great. One of my favorite things. But anyways, I put it on not just to show it off and how good I look in it. My boobs look great. don't you think? Sorry, I apologize. Anyways, off to a good start. But the reason I have this on today is I actually want to talk a little bit about Star Trek and specifically the treatment of a specific fan fiction project by Paramount and use it as a jumping off point to talk about the place of fan fiction, not only in Star Trek, but in how we as fans and people who love different things engage with art, and how capitalism has put a hamper on how typically people have, been able to expand and grow and engage with the things that they love. So let me give you the quick details on what's been going down. This book that I have right here in my hand is the physical edition version of a fan fiction series that two of my friends, Eric and Andy, actually wrote called We Have Engaged the Borg, The Oral History of Wolf 359. It is a fantastic fan-made project that they have made no money on, so it fits under fan fiction project. That it's just the stunning art in this book, but it is also an oral history of the Borg attack at Wolf 359, and it gets into such really great minutia on just showcasing what it would actually be like if you were at Starfleet in something like that, and just seeing this Eldritch monster Borg come at you, and all the politics of it, the nitty-gritty of Starfleet planning, the failures, the cowardices, the heroics of that whole sequence. It is one of the best fan fiction things I have ever seen written by anybody, and it is so incredibly good, and it has gotten a lot of buzz in the past few months since they finished it and released it for the world. Even I know showrunners of different shows have engaged with it and talked about it. Different actors involved get involved in it. It is a very well received fan fiction project, but it is a fan fiction project, and as I said, they are not making money off of it. They only made a few editions of this book that they were kind enough to give me one, and they're not making money off it. They're just getting out there because they love Star Trek and they wanted to do something cool. And this is something that a lot of fan fiction projects have done for Star Trek over the years. I did a whole video on my main channel called How Slash Fiction Saved Star Trek about how fan fiction and fan films have always been a lot of how Trekkies have engaged with Star Trek. You can go back to the 1960s with Kirk/Spock fan fiction, which helped to instigate a lot of the fan convention movement around Star Trek, because there was a lot of the fanzines that those stories were sold within, and sort of galvanized that movement, leading to the fandom that we have today, not just in Star Trek but everywhere, but also saving Star Trek as well. It led to convention scenes that we've had today. Even during the dead times with Star Trek Enterprise and between Star Trek 2009, you had fan films like Star Trek Hidden Frontier or Star Trek Continues, or I can think of Star Trek Odyssey. There's a whole bunch that I used to love. These Are the Voyages. Some really great projects that helped keep the fandom of Star Trek going during those dead years, and I remember loving and watching so many. Hidden Frontier was my shit. I loved that. I actually had some gay characters in Star Trek before actual Star Trek did. So all of those things were wonderful, and it has been a loved part of how Star Trek and fandoms and Trekkies have engaged with work. Fan fiction is just part of every big series now. Now, to be fair to Paramount, they got very persnickety around fan films after there was a fan film project called Axanar, which I'm not getting into the whole nitty-gritty of that situation. It gets very tedious, but eventually it resulted in a lawsuit because the people who were making Axanar were using it to help fund a studio that they were doing, which is kind of against what, how fan films and fan fiction have been allowed to keep going in this day and age, is that they don't make money. And Axanar was in this weird gray area of they weren't directly making money, but they were using it to make money separately. It fell in this gray area, and as a result, CBS clamped down on something that they normally hadn't clamped down upon, and made rules for fan films. So you can only have so many set minutes of stuff, and you can't make any money. They made very specific guidelines, and to a degree I understand their position on that, but it was also very hard to see happen after this has been a very thriving community for a very long time. But again, I understood the situation to an extent. So this all led them to recently, after this was released, We Have Engaged the Borg, they brought a cease and desist against We Have Engaged the Borg, telling them to stop, which had them pulled down. Now, thankfully, it has been brought back up, and the Wolf 359 project's backed up for everyone to see, but they had to tear down some of the artwork because that was part of the cease and desist. But it led me to start thinking more about fan fiction, not just in the history of Star Trek, but what it means generally, and why I think it's an important thing to constantly be engaged with. Now, we live in a capitalist society, and everyone knows, Jesse's no big fan of that. So there's always a part of me that's like, screw this whole, like, you can't make money off it. But I understand the back and forth of it if we live in a capitalist society, that there's going to be copyright claims. But this goes against the spirit of, like, how people used to engage with a lot of art. A lot of art, up until, like, recent decades, has been about, like, collaborative spirit built up of over time. You saw things like different stories being told about Robin Hood, for example. Like, part of the reason Robin Hood became such a, famous work of storytelling is because people kept adding to it, and different stories, different canons were created because people engaged with it in different ways. It wasn't like, oh, we have to, one person owns this property and you can't deal with it in any way, shape, or form. It's like, no, when people get passionate about something, we want to add to it, we want to build upon it. And it's only been, like, in recent decades, as we've come more and more into this capitalist idea of, like, not only private property, like physical land is, like, things that we get to own in capitalism, but ideas. And we copyright ideas and things that, like, stories. And you can't have any more stories, and it gets pushed into not just artists who control the stories, but big corporations like Disney and its copyright laws that it kept pushing further and further with intellectual property, with Mickey Mouse, and trying to keep the IP on that. And it's just sort of this continual, like, giving this storytelling ability over to corporations rather than the artists who create it. Because there is something to be said, I will say, about, like, artists being able to own their work for a set period of time. We had Arthur Conan Doyle told Sherlock Holmes stories, and he wrote for a certain amount of time, but even only recently those stories have come into the public domain. But, like, there were people that love to engage with that. But I also understand Arthur Conan Doyle being like, I want to be able to tell the story my way for a certain amount of time, and then people can engage with it. Which is why I always support, like, a length of time, but a normal, like, maybe when an author's dead, or then a little bit time after, not this endless holding on to it forever. Because there are so many great Star Trek projects and stories and other fandom stories that are really worth telling, that we don't get to tell, and instead we get these, like, corporate mandated versions of Star Trek. And I love Lower Decks, I love Strange New Worlds and Picard, but I think there are also, like, so many good creative ideas out there that could have even brought Star Trek even further if we had been allowed to not just have it under copyright, but became a thing that people used as a format for storytelling. So again, there's a battle back and forth in that, and if there's too much, it sort of gets lost in the noise. But I always feel like fan fiction, fan films, stories like this are a lifeblood of a franchise, to be able to still be able to tell stories even when the franchise isn't doing as well, or if it's not existent at certain points, or, like, it's just part of, like, fans being able to feel like they can contribute to this thing. Like, not everyone's going to be able to write an official CBS marked product of Star Trek, but they will be able to write their own fan fiction. They will be able to, like, feel like they can have an investment in the series. Like, I wrote my own fan fiction for a very long time, and so for Paramount to, like, deny something like the Wolf 359 project, which is made explicit, it's not making money. You could argue, like, maybe making a physical edition was a bit of a attentive thing to do. So I could even see that argument. But, like, overall, it is a project that I feel is made out of passion and is not trying to make money, and it is very good, and it seems to have really engaged the fandom, no pun intended, in a really strong way, and made people very excited. And I think that that's something we should encourage more of, and we get to see more of. I will also give a shout out, again, I will also fully admit that these people who write this, they gave me this, they are friends of mine, I do adore them, so I'm a little bit biased in this opinion. And I will also shout out the Oniaka 3 project, which was written by my friend Hai, because it's a really, one of the best things you will ever read. It's about the XBs and the history of the XBs after, Hugh, after Star Trek Next Generation Descent, leading into where we see them in Star Trek Picard. One of the best Like, you wouldn't think that would be super interesting. I mean, I would have thought early, but like, I know that's a hard sell to some people. It is one of the most interesting things that you will read. Go read the Oneaka 3 project. And it also connects with this. They put some little hints to it in here. And then also The Edge of Midnight. My friend John, who will be appearing in my Star Trek Strange New Worlds video next week, that'll be coming out on my main channel and out now on my Patreon. And The Edge of Midnight is the history of the Klingon War, and it's just a great look at like the politics of the Federation after like a bad war, after like essentially the Cold War, in the Federation history. It gets really into the politics of all that. I found it fascinating and some of the best writing stuff. Like those, Oniaka 3, We Have Engaged the Borg, and The Edge of Midnight are 3 of the best fan fiction projects you will ever read in Star Trek, so I highly recommend them. And I think that they are like the necessary lifeblood of what Star Trek is about. It's how Star Trek's been around for so long because of fan fiction, because of fan films going back to the 1960s. It's why fandom in general and fan conventions exist in the way they do today. today, going back to Star Trek itself and what it did in the 60s with slash fiction and fans did to keep that show alive. And it also just goes back to like how we as people engage with stories from about time immemorial. We used to just tell stories that like we built on and made our own little weird versions of. And you know, sometimes things would get more attention than others, but it was all like people wanting to contribute to the things that they loved and adored and building upon each other, that our society is now sort of cordoned off and given less and less to individuals, but over to corporations who just want to wring the money out of it and keep it being the same thing, like tell the same Star Trek stories over and over again, tell the same Star Wars stories over and over again. Sometimes like things like Andor or Lower Decks Prodigy gets made, but it's still trying to just keep the format the same. And ultimately, I think that that kills franchises to a degree. And I say this as someone who's loving where Star Trek is generally, and even liking a lot of Star Wars and other stuff. But I think that you should be able to allow these things, because without this stuff, your franchise will die faster than you would even want it to. But no one ever accused executives of thinking in the long term about things that people are passionate about. So that's my quick few cents that I wanted to just share about fan fiction. I also did it. I'm gonna be honest. Like I said, they didn't ask me to do this, but I love their work. I think it's some of the best writing. And I wouldn't say that if I didn't actually believe it. I would not promote them if I didn't think they were actually writing some of the best stuff, even if they were my friends. But I will allow you that I am biased in that sense. But it is really beautiful writing. But I just wanted to give those thoughts about fan fiction. Shout out my friends, and talk about say how executives are stupid, which I think we are not shocked to hear quite often. And corporations are stupid. Yeah. Can we get the Star Trek future, please?